Welcome back. The Transport Department has published the latest draft of the AARTO regulations. These new rules, which are currently open for public comment, detail how the new demerit system will work. They also prescribe how infringement notices or fines will be served on motorists. For more on that, we're joined by Outa's Chief Legal Officer, Stefanie Fick. Stefanie, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. So we saw this draft emerging a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago or a week ago. It's going to come into effect, hopefully, by the 1st of July 2021. And I'm saying hopefully as an optimistic South African. But some people are raising concerns about what we're seeing in this draft. What are you seeing?
Well, firstly, we just need to be mindful of the fact that the regulations is in terms of the AARTO Amendment Act that hasn't come into operation yet. We still need to see the date in terms when this Amendment Act will actually come into operation. But seeing the regulations, I think on the one hand, it gives you an indication as to what they would consider infringements and what type of penalty it will cover. There are a few that's a bit of a concern to us. And one of those are the fact that you can get an infringement notice, which can lead to enforcement order and penalties, is if you ignore a e-toll sign, which begs the question, are they going to keep e-tolls because we're still waiting for the whole e-toll question? And then if that is the case, it means that you will, how they are going to practically enforce that is really a question. So the regulations is really just practically how to deal with the Amendment Act, the forms and so forth. But I would really implore people to have a look. It is quite a few pages, but to have a look and make their comments known. Whatever you feel about the regulations, make it known and make an impact.
Yeah, and here's another point in this draft that is of concern. It says if the demerit points exceed the maximum points of 15, a person will be disqualified from driving or using a vehicle for a period of time, 3 months for every point exceeding 15 points. Now, the reality is that if you speed to work, for example, and you exceed this, you won't be able to drive. And we don't have a reliable public transport system. So this will affect people's jobs.
Yes. One has to weigh up the two. I mean, you are expected not to speed, but, there are circumstances where you may have to, there's an emergency, and despite, having to drive too fast, you do it responsibly, and, that there is a version. Now, according to the AARTO Act, you can make representations and all of that, but I think you have a valid point, is that, although we want to curb the deaths on our roads, we definitely do, and we also need to educate the public. We need to make sure that people abide by traffic laws, but we also need laws that is practical, that will, that you can enforce and hold to account the people that should be held to account. But it is a question. So you have the system, you have this administrative system that can cause people to lose their license, but you don't have an active public transport system. So the question is, one of the questions is, shouldn't we rather spend more money on visible policing to get the guys that speed, and I'm talking about 220, 250, trying out their cars on the highway, the guys that drive drunk? Shouldn't we have more visible policing so that they can go straight to jail? Spend a little bit more money on education and also maybe on a public transport system.
Do you reckon this demerit system will actually lead to better driving in South Africa? Because visible policing during the December-January period doesn't really work. So why would this system work?
But that is the question. I think that we just out of interstate went to check, and I just want to put a proviso. I mean, the minute you deal with stats and it's a very scientific method behind it. But we just went to look at all the numbers. Which year we saw, just looking at the numbers, a decline. So with the World Cup, what happened with the World Cup? More visible policing. So although visible policing over the Christmas period doesn't work, it means there needs to be more visible policing. I think if you spend more resources in training your officers, spend more resources on curbing corruption, get the public on board. In other words, the public will know that everyone will be treated exactly the same way, that we will try and curb, for example, vehicles that is not roadworthy, that everybody will be stopped, that there will be no crime, that you will be able to curb the more serious offences.
All right, thank you so much for your time and your insight. Appreciate it. Outa's Chief Legal Officer, Stefanie Fick.